All right, let's jump right in. February 22nd, 2026. Mexican Special Forces, with a huge assist from U.S. intelligence, finally kill the world's most wanted drug trafficker, a man named Nemesio Oseguera Cervantes, better known as El Mencho. On paper, it was a massive tactical victory, but that victory, it came at a terrifying, immediate, and fiery cost.
You see, within just hours of the raid, the organization El Mencho built, the Jalisco New Generation Cartel, unleashed absolute hell. They launched over 250 narco blockades in this coordinated wave of retaliatory terror. What that means is, operatives hijacked cars, buses, big rigs, and then set them on fire to paralyze major highways across 20 different Mexican states. The entire country was basically brought to a standstill.
And the cost in blood? It was just staggering. In the first 48 hours, in the state of Jalisco alone, 25 members of the Mexican National Guard were killed. And these weren't just random firefights. No, these were a series of highly coordinated, sophisticated ambushes on military patrols. A very clear, very brutal message was being sent.
But the physical attacks, well, they were only half the story. The CJNG also kicked off a campaign of psychological warfare. A manifesto, supposedly from the cartel's surviving leadership, got leaked online. It declared an all-out war on the state, and, maybe most chillingly, on civilians, with this one terrifying exception. The message triggered mass panic. We're talking people stampeding at the Guadalajara airport, the governor declaring a code red, telling 8 million citizens to just shelter in place.
So this brings us to the big question, right? How did taking out a single person at the top cause such a catastrophic, nationwide implosion? To really get a handle on the chaos that followed El Mencho's death, we first have to understand the man himself and the terrifying paramilitary empire he built.
So to answer that, we have to look at the guy at the center of it all, Nemesio Oseguera Cervantes, El Mencho. His story isn't just about being a drug lord. It's about the evolution of a criminal into the commander of a full-blown narco-insurgency, the Jalisco New Generation Cartel, or CJNG.
His career path is basically a masterclass in criminal escalation. He starts out as a low-level dealer in the U.S., gets nabbed and deported, and then works his way up as an enforcer for the super-powerful Sinaloa cartel. But then, in 2010, his boss gets killed. El Mencho sees a power vacuum and he seizes it, founding the CJNG. And here's what shows his ambition. By 2015, his guys were using rocket-propelled grenades to shoot down military helicopters. He wasn't just hiding from the state, he was fighting it, head-on.
Now, what really set El Mencho's cartel apart was its structure. He built it to be a hierarchical, paramilitary force. I mean, they paraded around in these custom-built armored trucks they called monsters. They used commercial drones to drop bombs. They even mined rural roads with IEDs, like a full-blown insurgency. And the psychological conditioning was just horrific. There were reports of enforced cannibalism, meant to desensitize new sicarios, new hitmen. This wasn't a gang, it was an army.
So if this force was so powerful, how in the world did they finally get to him? Well, the answer lies in a major geopolitical shift. A new president in Mexico meant a whole new strategy, and that strategy would finally be the one to close the net on El Mencho.
For years, Mexico's policy under President López Obrador was famously hugs not bullets. It was a non-confrontational approach that, let's be honest, allowed the CJNG to expand its empire with very little interference. But his successor, President Claudia Sheinbaum, completely threw that out the window. She brought in a new, data-driven model focused on high-impact targeting, a strategy of intelligence and investigation. It's a strategy that she and her security chief, Omar Garcia Harfuch, a guy who himself survived a massive CJNG assassination attempt back in 2020, had really perfected in Mexico City.
This new Mexican strategy then got supercharged by a ton of pressure from the United States. In February 2025, the Trump administration took a huge step. It officially designated the CJNG as a foreign terrorist organization. Now, this wasn't just symbolic. That FTO designation legally unlocked advanced U.S. military intelligence and surveillance assets that had been off-limits for anti-drug operations. The hunt was suddenly on a whole new level.
And what came next was this very methodical dismantling of El Mencho's entire world. They didn't just go after him, they went after his support structure. First, his son and heir gets sentenced to life in the U.S. Then his brother-in-law, the financial mastermind, is extradited. A brand new U.S.-Mexico intelligence fusion center was set up to break down all the old bureaucratic walls. So, isolated and stripped of his inner circle, El Mencho made a fatal mistake.
Intelligence assets were able to find him by tracking a new romantic partner who's traveling to his mountain hideout.
Okay, so the Kingpin is dead. But as we saw at the beginning, his death didn't stop the violence. In fact, it might have just been the start. See, when you remove the absolute ruler of a paramilitary empire like the CJNG, you don't destroy it, you create a massive and incredibly dangerous power vacuum.
Security experts have a name for what's likely to happen next: balkanization. It's when a once unified empire fractures into all these warring fiefdoms. And we've seen this play out before. After the Sinaloa cartel leader El Mayo Zambada was arrested, that group fell into a brutal civil war. The fear is that a CJNG civil war could be exponentially worse, just given their superior firepower and their whole doctrine of ultraviolence.
With no clear successor, the entire empire is now up for grabs. There are at least 4 powerful lieutenants, each with their own power base, who are all ready to fight for the throne. You've got El Pelon, the stepson and sort of logical successor. There's El Jardinero, who controls key territories and drug labs. You have El Sapo, the financer, who controls the money and the ports. And finally, El Doble R, the brutal commander of the cartel's elite military wing. It's a recipe for all-out war.
And hey, don't just take the analyst's word for it. In the days right after the raid, an anonymous source from inside the CJNG itself gave this chillingly blunt warning to the media. The people inside the organization know exactly what's about to happen. A bloody succession war isn't just a possibility, it's a certainty.
Now, the fallout from this single event doesn't just stop at Mexico's borders. It's actually set to fundamentally change the dynamics of the global synthetic drug trade and create a new, much more complex phase in the war on drugs.
So this internal chaos creates a new global problem. Let's call it the synthetic drug paradox. See, unlike cocaine or heroin, which rely on crops, synthetic drugs like fentanyl and meth just need precursor chemicals. As these CJNG factions go to war with each other, they're going to need huge amounts of cash to buy weapons and pay their fighters. And what's their quickest path to that cash? Ramping up synthetic drug production. So killing the Kingpin could, ironically, lead to a surge in the supply of fentanyl hitting the streets around the world.
This completely changes the game for law enforcement. Before, they had one main giant target to track. It was massive, sure, but it was singular. Now, in the aftermath, they're facing 4, maybe more, independent, decentralized, and competing trafficking networks. The complexity of trying to intercept the drugs, track the money, it just multiplied overnight.
And that leaves us with this really unsettling reality. The operation to kill El Mencho was a tactical masterpiece, a huge victory for Mexico and the U.S. But it also raises this deeply troubling question. In taking the head off this criminal empire, did they just shatter it into smaller, more chaotic, and maybe even more violent pieces? In killing one king, have they unintentionally just crowned a dozen new ones and plunged the region into an even deadlier era of conflict?